Sharon and Seamus have been partners for over 7 years, sharing their lives under one roof for the past 4 years and engaged for the last 3. At 27 years old, Seamus is slightly older than 26-year-old Sharon. For the sake of this story, let's use their pseudonyms. Recently, their relationship has begun to show signs of strain, which can often accompany long-term commitments. However, the challenges they face, while significant, are not insurmountable. Despite the pressures and complications of life, both are committed to each other and do not view legal marriage as a necessary step for their bond. Sharon is open to the idea of marriage if Seamus also wanted it, but they feel that the depth of their commitment surpasses the need for a formal document. They have plans to start a family within the next year to 18 months, imagining a future with children. The issues they have encountered stem largely from Seamus's workaholic tendencies. When they first started dating, their intimacy was vibrant and frequent, with multiple intimate moments happening in a single day. However, as time progressed, that frequency gradually decreased. By the 3rd year of their relationship, they were intimate around 3 times a week, which further dwindled to about 2 times a week last year. Presently, their intimacy has regressed to less than twice a week, and there are instances where they go over a week without any intimate connection. Despite Sharon's unwavering desire for Seamus, his interest has waned, primarily due to the overwhelming demands of his job. Seamus recognizes that the stress and exhaustion from work are impacting their relationship but has yet to take meaningful steps to remedy the situation. Last year, Seamus received a promotion to assistant manager, a role that came with a higher salary. However, the reality of longer hours means he is actually earning less per hour than he did in his previous position, making it difficult for Sharon to see this as a true advancement in his career. They have had numerous discussions about the implications of his job on their relationship, with Seamus asserting that his hard work is ultimately for their future and their eventual family. He expresses a desire to save for a house, hoping to create a comfortable environment in which Sharon can stay home with their first child. These intentions, while noble, have left Sharon feeling lonely and neglected. She works at a call center for a bank, a job she finds unsatisfying, and while she appreciates Seamus's sacrifices, her requests for more affection and time together often lead to only temporary improvements before he slips back into his work routine, leaving her feeling like an afterthought. Even during the time Seamus is home, he often immerses himself in work-related tasks, spending time on his laptop or on the phone dealing with store matters. This pattern has become increasingly frustrating for Sharon. She feels a disconnect, particularly when he opts for gaming during his scarce free time, choosing virtual interactions over real ones. He has encouraged her to join him in these gaming sessions as a way to unwind and bond, but Sharon has no interest in that and has sensed a growing distance between them, despite knowing that his love for her remains strong. Currently, Sharon's work environment adds another layer of complexity to her situation. At the call center, she has noticed that some colleagues engaging in open relationships or marriages claim these arrangements have significantly enriched their love lives. A coworker, whom we will call Jessica, has spoken with Sharon at length about her own experiences and the idea of exploring an open relationship. Around a month ago, Jessica brought up the idea of including Seamus in this arrangement, revealing her attraction to him and mentioning that her husband found Sharon appealing as well. Sharon's instinct was to firmly decline this proposal, recognizing the potential complications it could introduce to both her personal and professional life, especially since they worked in the same department. The notion of sharing intimacy with another person, particularly a friend, felt uncomfortable and inappropriate, prompting Sharon to create some distance in their friendship. Despite her clear rejection, Jessica continued to bring up the idea of an open relationship, which only led to further distancing from Sharon. She could no longer view Jessica in the same light once she learned of her interest in Seamus. Although they still occasionally had lunch together, their after-work interactions diminished significantly. A few weeks ago, Jessica shared that another colleague, the IT person for their department, is in an open relationship with his wife. This older man, perhaps in his late 40s, is considered attractive and is known for being kind and soft-spoken. This revelation has added another layer of complexity to Sharon's reflections on her own relationship with Seamus and the broader dynamics at play in her life. Jessica, a kind and soft-spoken individual who always seemed to take care of herself, was the one who first suggested that I might want to talk to Taylor if I had any interest in exploring the idea of an open relationship. At the time, I was taken aback by her suggestion, so I quickly told her that I wasn't interested and pointed out that she was the one who kept bringing the topic up in our conversations. Despite my clear response, several days later, I found myself in the break room when Taylor approached me. He asked if he could join me, and I agreed, curious about what he had to say. Taylor took a seat across from me, and we engaged in some light small talk, sharing casual banter that made the atmosphere feel friendly and relaxed. After a few minutes, he brought up Jessica's suggestion, mentioning that she had told him I might be open to the concept of an open relationship. I felt my heart sink at the realization that Jessica had taken it upon herself to share such a personal topic without my consent. I was surprised by Taylor's mention of it, and I felt compelled to clarify my stance. I gently explained to him that I wasn't truly interested in that kind of arrangement and that while Jessica and a few other colleagues had introduced the topic to me, it had not sparked any real curiosity on my part. However, Taylor did not seem to take my disinterest as a final answer. Instead, he encouraged me to reconsider, citing the potential health benefits and growth opportunities that such a relationship could offer. He spoke with such a calm and respectful demeanor that, despite feeling a bit offended by his insistence, I found it hard to take any offense. I smiled politely and thanked him for his thoughts, assuring him that I would keep it in mind if my feelings ever changed. We continued our small talk for the remainder of the break, and I appreciated how easy he was to talk to. Later that afternoon, as I sat at my desk, I found myself reflecting on my conversation with Taylor. The idea of an open relationship began to linger in my mind, and I considered that if I were ever to explore this avenue, Taylor would be an ideal partner for it. He exuded maturity and respect, and I knew he was married with children, which made any romantic entanglement unlikely. He had made it clear that his commitment to his family was unwavering. Similarly, my feelings for Seamus remained strong. He was my soulmate, and I knew that even if I entertained the idea of exploring a new relationship style, my love for him would remain steadfast. That night when I returned home, Seamus called to let me know that he would be working late, until 8:30 p.m., because someone had unexpectedly called out sick. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me, as we had planned a romantic dinner and a special evening together. He apologized and promised he would make it up to me when he finally got home. However, when he did come home after 9 p.m., he looked utterly exhausted and simply collapsed onto the couch. My frustration boiled over. I was deeply upset by his apparent disregard for our plans, so I left him there and went to bed around 3 a.m. When he finally came into the bedroom, he kissed me softly, but I pretended to be asleep, consumed by my feelings of neglect and disappointment. The next morning, he left early for work, giving me a quick peck on the lips, which I didn't reciprocate, still feeling hurt. Later, he called to apologize again for the previous night, but then immediately shifted the conversation to a surprise dinner he would be having with his district manager after work. I couldn't help but respond sarcastically, remarking that I was already quite aware of his tendency to come home late. He asked for clarification, so I pointed out that it had been a while since he had returned home at a reasonable hour. The call ended with him expressing his love for me, but all I managed to say was a quick, "all right," before hanging up, feeling visibly upset. Seeking a distraction, I requested an early lunch break from my manager, who kindly approved it. While I was in the lunchroom, Taylor noticed my evident distress and came over to sit with me. Sensing that I was upset, he began to speak to me in his soothing manner, and by the end of my break, I felt remarkably better. Before we returned to work, he invited me to join him and a few of his IT colleagues for happy hour. He suggested that getting out and socializing would do me good, rather than spending another evening alone at home. Feeling a sense of obligation since Taylor had brightened my day, I agreed to go with him to happy hour. At the gathering, our conversation flowed effortlessly, and I found him easy to talk to. We discussed his marriage in detail, touching on how he and his wife were navigating some challenges together. As the evening rolled on, I couldn't help but feel a sense of connection with Taylor. The weight of my earlier frustrations began to lift, allowing me to enjoy the rest of the night. He and his wife were navigating a situation that resembled the experience of Seamus and me. Taylor shared an intriguing perspective, mentioning that opening the doors to their relationship had actually revitalized their marriage, leading to a stronger bond. They were thriving together, happy and content even to this day. After leaving happy hour, I sensed that tonight could be an appropriate moment to discuss this topic with Seamus and see how he would respond. When Seamus arrived home around 9 p.m., I initiated a conversation about his meeting with his district manager. He reported that it went well, and then he turned the conversation to how my evening had unfolded at happy hour. I responded that it was fine but admitted that I would have enjoyed it much more if he had been there with me. I decided against mentioning the fact that I had been there alone, chatting with another guy, even though the interaction had been entirely innocent. There was a brief lull in our discussion, which prompted me to bring up the topic of 5 coworkers who were currently in open relationships. This was new information for Seamus. He had not heard about this phenomenon before. His immediate reaction was to question whether this was about people being unfaithful while still remaining in a committed relationship. I replied affirmatively but in simpler terms. He expressed his disapproval vehemently, labeling it as both stupid and disgusting, suggesting instead that those individuals in such relationships should simply break up so they could freely pursue other partnerships. I attempted to clarify that the intention behind these open relationships was not to endorse infidelity but to strengthen the connections between the couples involved. He found this concept absurd and pressed me for further explanation, which unfortunately left me at a loss for words. It was at that moment I thought of bringing up Jessica and her husband, who were a part of this discussion. When I mentioned them, Seamus reacted with disbelief, questioning whether I was serious. I assured him I was not joking. He asked why I hadn't brought this up sooner, and I confessed that I had feared it might cause him to want to distance himself from them. He conceded that he wouldn't be spending time with them any longer since he found their lifestyle distasteful. Afterward, Seamus continued to ask more about the subject. He solicited my opinion, to which I replied that if open relationships worked for those involved, then it was entirely their choice to pursue that path. He then probed further, asking if I would ever entertain the idea of an open relationship. I clarified that it would only be a consideration if he was on board with it. His surprise was evident as he repeated my statement, clearly processing my words. "So you're telling me that if I agreed to this, you would do it?" I confirmed, emphasizing that it would only be if he was also agreeable to the idea. His response was simply, wow, okay, accompanied by a look of confusion. Our conversation reached a natural conclusion when Seamus received a call from his father, during which he spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Once he finished, we shifted back into a more intimate space, sharing a passionate makeout session that felt refreshing and brought us closer together. However, the following week was challenging as Seamus's work schedule became increasingly demanding. He often worked late, sometimes not returning home until after 7 p.m. due to an unexpected resignation at his job, which only added to the pressure he was under. Feeling frustrated with the circumstances, I decided to meet up with Taylor for drinks again. We went out right after work and stayed until 7 p.m. Our conversations delved deep into the intricacies of open relationships and explored how such arrangements could potentially work for us. I must admit, some of our discussions brushed against sensitive subjects, but everything remained within the realm of conversation without crossing any lines. After our drinks, I ordered takeout from the bar for both Seamus and me, returning home without mentioning my time spent with Taylor. The following week seemed to show signs of improvement in my relationship with Seamus. Although he was still working late, he managed to come home before 7 p.m. We had plans set for a special dinner on Thursday to celebrate our 7th anniversary together. However, the night before, he informed me that his regional manager would be visiting the next day, resulting in an unexpected operations review. He expressed his apologies and suggested that we postpone our anniversary dinner until Friday. I could sense his awareness of my disappointment, but I agreed to the change reluctantly. He further mentioned the need to prepare for the meeting in our home office, which meant he would not be able to join me for our planned television time. This left me feeling upset and increasingly frustrated with the situation. The next morning, he woke up before 5 a.m. and left the house shortly after 6 a.m. giving me a quick goodbye kiss as he headed off to work. He leaned in and kissed me goodbye, a tender gesture that lingered in the air between us. As he pulled away, he casually mentioned that he might not be back until well after 9 p.m. because the regional manager had made dinner plans for himself and Seamus. I nodded, offering an understanding okay, echoing what I had anticipated earlier. It was part of our routine. I had expected the late return due to the importance of his job. Before he left, I felt compelled to ask him if he could promise to take me out the next day. He responded with a reassuring commitment that he would make it home by 5 p.m., no matter what. With that, we exchanged another kiss, and he departed, leaving me standing there, feeling both content and slightly lonely. As the hours dragged on during my workday, my mind kept drifting back to the thought of possibly spending yet another evening alone. The anticipation of an empty night loomed over me, and just as my shift was coming to a close, I received a chat message from Taylor. He casually asked if I'd like to join him for a drink after work. I weighed my options for a moment, contemplating whether I should go or just head home to the solitude I was beginning to become accustomed to. Eventually, I agreed to meet him, deciding that a little company wouldn't hurt. I went home first to freshen up, wanting to look decent for our outing. Arriving at the tavern shortly after 5 p.m., I found the atmosphere buzzing with chatter and laughter, a welcome distraction from my earlier worries. Taylor and I spent nearly 3 hours there, enjoying each other's company as well as the lively environment around us. During our time together, I received a text from Seamus. His message simply read, "Where are you?" I replied succinctly, "I'm at the tavern with some people from work." Technically, it wasn't a lie, as a couple of colleagues from the loan processing department were indeed sitting at the bar. After that, I took a moment to ask him how his meeting with the regional manager had gone. He replied with enthusiasm, stating it went, "Fantastic, absolutely fantastic." I responded with a casual, "Great, see you later," before turning my attention back to Taylor. As the evening wore on, I must admit that our conversation strayed into territory that was both inappropriate and deeply personal. We discussed intimate topics, preferences, and positions, the nature of our dialogue becoming more intimate as the hours passed. Towards the end of the night, Taylor began to touch my hands, holding them gently until I felt compelled to withdraw. When he walked me to my car, I was surprised by a long embrace, followed by an unexpected kiss on the lips. The kiss caught me completely off guard. While I didn't express my discomfort in the moment, I was sure he sensed my body language was off, that I hadn't welcomed that gesture. I drove home, eager to discuss his meeting and dinner plans with Seamus, hoping the conversation would lift my spirits. However, when Seamus finally walked through the door, he behaved as if everything was normal, yet I immediately noticed something was different. He didn't come over to kiss me as he usually did, and that absence left me feeling uneasy. I asked him about his meeting with the regional manager, and he offered a brief but unenthusiastic "great" without offering any details. Trying to change the subject, I shared how my workday had unfolded, describing it as the usual whirlwind of non-stop calls and high stress. He shifted the focus to happy hour, wanting to know who had attended. I replied that it was fine, mentioning it was mostly people from the IT department, most of whom he hadn't met. He followed up with a question about how many were there, and I hesitated, responding with an uncertain, "I don't know, maybe 8 or 9, something like that." An unease crept in as I recognized I was not being entirely truthful. Feeling guilty about my omission, I decided to ask him about his dinner. His revelation that they hadn't gone out for dinner at all hit me hard. The regional manager had returned home early to be with his wife, encouraging Seamus and his manager to do the same. My heart sank. I then asked Seamus where he had been until now, to which he replied, "At the tavern, looking for you." A wave of sickness washed over me, a heavy realization settling in as I prepared for his next words. Indeed, it was in that moment when he confirmed what I feared. I didn't want to believe it, but it was true. He had seen everything. I stammered, asking what he meant, and he explained how he had witnessed me with Taylor. He spoke of seeing us smiling at each other, holding hands, embracing, and even kissing. I felt completely lost for words, merely managing to utter, "You don't understand." His response was firm, "No, I do understand. Now it all makes sense why you brought up an open relationship out of nowhere last week. You were seeking permission to be with this guy." Then, with a broken expression on his face, he asked how long I had been cheating on him. I quickly assured him that I hadn't cheated, that our interactions had only consisted of conversations. I expressed my deep remorse, but he coldly stated that apologies wouldn't suffice this time. I could hear the tremor in his voice as he revealed how I had shattered his trust and broken his heart. Overwhelmed with guilt, I felt the tears streaming down my face as I cried. Each sob was accompanied by a heartfelt apology, but he wouldn't listen to my pleas. He stood firm in his decision, stating he was leaving to stay with his dad for a while. My desperation grew as I begged him not to go, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush, desperately hoping he might reconsider and find it in his heart to forgive me. But he was resolute, steadfast in his choice. As he departed, I couldn't let go. I called him while he was on his way to his dad's house. When he answered, his voice was distant, filled with an emotion I couldn't fully grasp. He told me he wasn't ready to talk, that he needed time and distance to sort things out. Confused, I pressed him for clarity, asking what that meant for us. His reply was curt, "You know what that means." I continued to pour out my apologies, hoping to break through the silence that had suddenly enveloped us, but he remained unresponsive, and eventually, he ended the call without even a goodbye. Later, I walked into the bedroom and was struck by the sight of his belongings. Most of his clothes were gone, leaving behind only a couple of old winter coats, a few baseball caps, and an old pair of shoes. The realization hit me hard. He had likely packed his things before I got home, waiting for my return to slip out. It dawned on me that his delayed arrival was deliberate. My heart sank as I collapsed onto the bed, overwhelmed, desperately wishing that this was just a nightmare I could wake from. The days dragged on, and I found myself sending him text messages filled with regret and declarations of love, hoping that he might respond, but my messages remained unanswered. I spiraled into a deep depression, which prompted several of my girlfriends from work to come over on Saturday evening in a desperate attempt to lift my spirits. They eventually took me out, and for the first time in nearly 8 years, I drank heavily, trying to drown my sorrows. When I woke up on Sunday morning, still groggy from the previous night's excess, I heard a soft knocking at the door. Peering through the peephole, my heart raced as I saw it was Seamus standing on the other side. A wave of happiness washed over me at the sight of him, but I quickly questioned why he hadn't just used his key to let himself in. When I opened the door, I couldn't help myself. I embraced him tightly, pouring out my emotions about how much I loved and missed him and how heartbroken I felt ever since he left. He gestured for me to take a seat, and as he did, the urgency of the moment hit me. I instinctively began to apologize again, but he interrupted me, stating he didn't have time for that because his dad was waiting for him in the car. Then, in a surprising twist, he revealed that he had been promoted to a store manager position. I congratulated him with genuine enthusiasm, wrapping my arms around him in a warm hug, expressing how proud I was of his hard work and the recognition he so richly deserved. But then he dropped the bombshell. The store he would be managing was in another state, and he was relocating in just 2 weeks. My heart shattered at the thought, and I desperately asked if I could go with him. His response was blunt and crushing, "No, I'm breaking up with you." Tears instantly welled in my eyes as I pleaded with him, asking why he was making such a decision. His answer was cold and unwavering, "You know why." In a state of despair, I inquired about my future, and he callously stated that I would need to figure it out on my own. He then revealed that he had already ended the lease on our apartment. Thankfully, the rental manager had agreed to reduce the remaining 8-month lease to just 60 days, allowing me a small window to make plans. With the rental market booming, he mentioned that the landlord could easily rent it out at a higher rate than what we had initially agreed upon. Seamus went on to say that he had taken care of the last lease payment, but if I wanted to stay in the apartment after those 60 days, I would need to sign a new lease. He knew all too well that I couldn't afford to cover the rent alone since he had been responsible for 2/3 of our living expenses. He told me I could keep all the furniture and the commitment ring he had given me, but I couldn't hold back my tears and pleaded for him to reconsider, for another chance. His response remained firmly unyielding, "No, it's over." Feeling a wave of nausea, I rushed to the bathroom, fearing I might be physically ill. When I returned, he had vanished from sight. Desperate to talk, I called him, but he repeated that his dad was waiting and that he had to leave. My attempts to communicate with him fell flat, and the rest of the morning blurred as I found myself on the bathroom floor, a mix of tears and a sickening ache in my stomach overwhelming me. In the afternoon, 2 of my coworkers came over to check in on me. Right away, they could see that I was in a state of distress. Concerned for my well-being, they didn't hesitate to ask for my mother's contact details. They called her and explained the situation, telling her that I really needed her support after Seamus had ended our relationship. Faced with this news, my mom immediately made the decision to drive 3 hours to be with me, arriving late last night, on Sunday evening. As I sit here in the early hours of Monday morning, the weight of everything I've been feeling throughout the night has left me feeling like a restless wreck. In an attempt to untangle my thoughts and emotions, I've decided to put everything I'm experiencing on paper, hoping to find some clarity and perhaps, guidance on the next steps I should take. I find myself wondering if there's any way to rectify this situation. I am fully aware that my actions could be classified as cheating, particularly since I engaged in private conversations with Taylor. However, I want to emphasize that while our interactions included a kiss and a hug, it was important to note that Seamus was the one who initiated the kiss. I did not reciprocate in the way he might have hoped. This experience has taught me a significant lesson, and I have no intentions of making the same mistakes again. If Seamus were to give our relationship another chance, I would wholeheartedly commit to not letting him down again. Currently, I am navigating one of the darkest periods of my life, and I find myself in deep need of love and support. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. I appreciate any insights or questions you may have. Fast forward 74 days after my initial post, and I'm back again, as many of you have been asking for updates on my situation. Life has taken quite a turn for me, and I've recently moved back in with my parents now that my lease has ended. I made the difficult decision to leave my job at the bank, and with plenty of help from my dad, mom, and brother, we managed to pack up my belongings, which are now stored away in the garage. To say I feel broken would be an understatement of epic proportions. My mental state is in shambles, and words can hardly express the depths of my despair. Without the unwavering support of my family, I honestly don't know where I would be. It's a painful thought to entertain. Regret overwhelms me, and I often find myself wishing I could turn back time and make better choices. As I reflect on everything that has transpired, realizations hit me like a ton of bricks about the significant things I foolishly let slip away. To make matters worse, about a week before I moved back home, I unexpectedly ran into Seamus's father at the gas station. We've always had a good rapport, and our conversation lasted for about 15 minutes. During that time, he disclosed that Seamus had been looking for me at the restaurant on the very night I was with Taylor. He had wanted to share some exciting news about his promotion and even invited me to celebrate with him. Hearing this absolutely shattered me. Since then, I have had a couple of phone conversations with Seamus. He mentioned that he is genuinely happy with his new job, even though it keeps him incredibly busy. During our chats, I took the opportunity to sincerely apologize for my actions, and he graciously accepted my apology. He expressed gratitude for the wonderful moments we shared, but he also made it clear that in his view, we are not a good match moving forward and that we wouldn't resume our relationship. However, he is open to maintaining a civil friendship, which has been an incredibly painful adjustment for me, more hurtful than I can articulate. Despite this pain, I'm conscious not to pressure him or seem clingy. I'm simply grateful he's willing to communicate with me. During our last call a couple of weeks ago, I told him that if he ever changes his mind about us, I would be on the next flight to see him. That brings us to the current situation. I have my first therapy session scheduled for next week, which I hope will help me navigate this overwhelming emotional turmoil. In the past week, I have submitted job applications to several places, showing that I'm trying to move forward, albeit slowly. I would really appreciate it if you could keep me in your thoughts and prayers. I genuinely value all the kindness and support that you have shown me, even as complete strangers. Now that I've shared this chapter of my story, let's move on to another exciting adventure in my life and see where it leads. Stay tuned. In my third year of college, I decided to take a break from my studies and visit the local city library. It was there that I stumbled upon a really attractive girl. Our conversation flowed easily, and we spent some time chatting. During our exchange, she mentioned that she was single, which prompted us to exchange email addresses. Unlike me, she wasn't a college student. Instead, she was preparing for a clerical position at a hospital. After we parted ways, we started exchanging emails, but finding a suitable time for a date turned out to be a bit of a challenge. Since she was always busy working to manage her responsibilities, and I was deeply invested in my school commitments, it took some time for me to truly understand the challenges she was facing. Eventually, I found out that she was in a difficult situation with her ex-boyfriend. Although she wanted to break up with him, she hesitated to let me go because she claimed to have strong feelings for me and expressed belief in my potential future. Our casual dating began a few months after that pivotal encounter at the library. From that moment, we embarked on a journey full of exciting dates, exploring new places, and spending countless hours discussing each other's dreams and aspirations. With every shared experience, I realized how much I valued her companionship. Our time together was filled with laughter, and she had an incredible talent for lifting my spirits, even on the darkest days. As the months passed, I noticed that our time spent together was increasing significantly. It began to feel like we were in an unofficial monogamous relationship, which suited me perfectly. My feelings for her had deepened, and I sensed that she reciprocated my emotions. Though we lived separately, we made plans to move in together once my current lease expired. This seemed like a natural evolution of our relationship, and we were both genuinely excited about the prospect of sharing a home. She shared with me that she had severed ties with her ex-boyfriend following their breakup due to his irresponsible behavior, which included not contributing to household expenses and having children with different women. While her past was somewhat complicated, I trusted her judgment and believed that she had made the right decision in cutting him out of her life. However, as our relationship progressed, I began to notice moments that left me uneasy. There were instances when she wouldn't answer her phone or would take an unusually long time to reply to my texts, which left me feeling frustrated and anxious. I tried to dismiss these feelings, rationalizing that perhaps she was simply busy with her own life or preoccupied with other matters. But after several days of fluctuating emotions, I knew I had to address the issue directly. I wanted our relationship to be built on open communication and honesty. When I confronted her about my concerns, she revealed that her ex-boyfriend was stalking her. This shocking revelation left me torn between believing her story and grappling with my own doubts. My mind was flooded with questions. Despite my uncertainty, I decided to approach her explanation with care and consideration. One day, as I was returning from a friend's house, I had a feeling she might be home, so I spontaneously decided to pay her a visit. It wasn't meant to be a surprise, as we didn't have cell phones back then, and I had dropped by unannounced a few times before without any issues. As I approached her apartment door, I was taken aback when I encountered a man leaving her place. He was carrying a large box, and we passed each other in the hallway. I was startled by this unexpected discovery, especially considering her earlier claims about him stalking her. It didn't seem to make sense that she would allow him into her apartment if the situation between them was truly hostile. She explained that he was there to collect his belongings and insisted that the stalking was a result of some of his property still being in her possession. However, as she continued to assert this explanation, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she might not be sharing the entire truth. The whole situation felt dubious, and I found myself questioning whether she was manipulating the facts to obscure what might really be happening. At that point in our relationship, I felt I was at a crossroads, unsure if I could trust her fully. As the semester came to a close, so did our plans to move in together, but my doubts remained heavy in the air. Following the incident with her ex-boyfriend, she became exceedingly affectionate. She went out of her way to express her love, cooking for me and giving thoughtful gifts. Part of me wondered if she sensed my uncertainty and was trying to rekindle the romance between us. I must admit, I was easily swayed by such gestures, and over time, her efforts gradually helped her regain my trust. As we made the significant decision to move in together, it felt like we were taking a major step forward in our relationship. The deepening of our bond led me to believe that everything was progressing seamlessly, and I was genuinely content. However, everything changed one unexpected day when she brought up the idea of exploring an open relationship, catching me completely off guard. I had never considered such an arrangement before, and the suggestion left me astonished. She passionately articulated her thoughts about the potential freedom and liberation an open relationship could offer, which only added to my confusion. In that moment, I found myself at a loss for words, unable to formulate a response. I chose to remain silent, hoping that she might eventually drop the subject altogether. Little did I know, this conversation was just the beginning of a series of revelations that would profoundly challenge my understanding of what our relationship entailed. During a particularly intimate moment, she opened up about her desires and expressed an interest in having sexual encounters with multiple partners. At first, I perceived her comments as playful banter, almost like a form of foreplay, and didn't give them much serious thought in the heat of the moment. However, once the passion subsided and reality set back in, her words began to linger in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that she might genuinely want to turn this fantasy into reality, which somehow intensified my anxieties about our relationship. As I lay awake at night, my mind became consumed with thoughts regarding the implications of her proposal. I began to question whether the love and commitment we had shared were truly enough for her. The idea of sharing her with another partner stirred up unsettling emotions, leaving me conflicted and uncertain. This unexpected revelation weighed heavily on my heart and mind, making me question the strength of our love. It felt as if we were moving in opposite directions, and I found myself grappling with my feelings, realizing that I needed time to process everything before making any decisions about our future together. After her candid expressions of desire during our intimate moments, which didn't resonate with me but seemed to excite her, we participated in further discussions about an open relationship. She mentioned that her ex-boyfriend had a specific interest in watching her engage with other men, and again she put forth the idea of an open arrangement. I expressed my thoughts respectfully and firmly declined, explaining that I had no interest in adopting that kind of lifestyle. Unfortunately, my rejection didn't sit well with her. She began exhibiting passive-aggressive behavior, attempting to provoke me in various ways. Despite her efforts to irritate me, I remained unyielding, which led her to gradually become less affectionate. She started withholding intimacy as a means of expressing her frustration, even going so far as to liken my behavior to that of a child. The strain of this situation began to take a toll on me emotionally, occupying my daily thoughts and ultimately affecting my academic performance. With my concentration faltering in school, I recognized that I needed to make a difficult decision about our relationship. After much deliberation, I chose to end things. Returning home, I summoned the courage to communicate my decision to her. I explained that I no longer wished to continue our relationship and believed it would be best for her to find another place to live. Her reaction was explosive. Anger surged through her, and she resorted to physical aggression, hurling hurtful names and making desperate pleas in an attempt to change my mind. Regardless of her emotional outburst, I had already resolved to focus on my studies and future, feeling that I could no longer accommodate the drama that had enveloped our lives. The very next day, she startled me with a claim that she might be pregnant. Approaching this news with skepticism, I couldn't help but wonder if it was a tactic designed to manipulate me into reconsidering our breakup. To back up her assertion, she sent me photos of pregnancy test results, seemingly aiming to validate her claim. Despite this evidence, I remained steadfast in my decision to end the relationship, driven by a lingering suspicion that she could have obtained those results from multiple sources in an effort to deceive me. As time passed, the situation grew increasingly worrisome. 2 months later, she reached out again, informing me that she had missed her period. Then, 4 months down the line, she sent me a photo displaying her growing baby bump. During this tumultuous period, mutual friends informed me that they had seen her with other men, including her ex-boyfriend, which only intensified my distress and uncertainty about everything that had transpired. This situation prompted me to reflect deeply on the possibility that I might not actually be the father of her child. Despite my suspicions, I couldn't ignore the reality that we had engaged in unprotected intercourse around the time she conceived. Generally, I always used protection because I valued safety, yet there remained a sliver of uncertainty. Accidents can happen, and this added to my overall confusion about the situation. Being in my final year of college and still quite young made me feel particularly unprepared to cope with what was unfolding. Nevertheless, I recognized that if the child turned out to be mine, I had a moral and legal responsibility to step up and assume the role of a father during her pregnancy. Throughout this period, she repeatedly asserted that the child could only be mine, leaving me to wrestle with my doubts about her fidelity during our relationship. I had lingering concerns about her involvement with other men, yet, reluctantly, I chose to accept her claims and go along with her narrative. Coincidentally, I found myself out of town when the baby was born. She tried to reach me, but this was a time before cell phones became common, so my options for communication were limited. I had traveled to another city with a college friend for a weekend getaway, partly to keep my distance from home as I grappled with my growing uncertainties regarding the paternity of the child. In the weeks following the baby's birth, I visited her and the baby a couple of times. Not long after those visits, my parents informed me that she had come to their house and introduced the baby as their new grandson. They were ecstatic and looking forward to stepping into the role of grandparents. However, I had to pause everything and explain to them that I was increasingly certain the child was not mine. The moment I set eyes on the baby, there was a distinct lack of connection. While it was undoubtedly a baby, I could not perceive any physical traits or features that reminded me of myself. Since she was already receiving government assistance, the state mandated a paternity test. This was a standard procedure whenever someone is on state aid programs, such as food stamps, to establish the identity of the father for child support purposes. Given the circumstances, I decided it would be best to proceed with the paternity test as planned. When the results arrived, they conclusively indicated that there was less than a 1% chance that I was the father. Armed with this definitive evidence, I made the decision to cut ties and move forward with my life. In the 2 interactions I had with her after receiving the test results, which took place over 20 years ago now, she appeared almost tearful, attempting to apologize for the turmoil she had caused me during that time. Through mutual acquaintances, I eventually found out who the actual father was. It turned out to be her ex-boyfriend, the same individual she had claimed was stalking her. Ironically, I had even encountered this man leaving her apartment with some boxes at one point. Unfortunately, he already had multiple children from different relationships and was unable to provide proper support for them. His struggles with health issues and addiction ultimately led to his premature death, leaving the child without a father figure in a challenging environment. Throughout this ordeal, I managed to stay composed and fully cooperative, which ultimately resulted in a commendation letter from the county prosecutor's office for my responsible conduct. It became clear to me that her pursuit of a relationship with me was motivated by my status as a college student with a promising future. While I genuinely believed she might have thought the child was mine, I also wondered if she had convinced herself of this to the extent that it felt like truth. Despite the tangled circumstances and the pain they brought, I couldn't harbor any resentment toward her. However, the way she handled the entire situation, her suggestion of an open relationship and the infidelity, led me to the conclusion that ending the relationship was the best course of action for my own well-being.